At the beginning of the story, the narrator tells us that even if a star isn't shining at the highest point in the night sky, but is instead trapped in a place where no one can see it, it is still a star. If it holds the desire to shine, and if there is still that burning fire in its heart, then it can become a shining star again. And now, at the start of the story, we are shown our main protagonist, who is standing in front of a blacksmith shop, looking at a gleaming sword. It was a knight's sword, and seeing it made him very happy. While looking at it, he says, "This is so cool, no matter how many times I see it." But then, a girl's voice comes from behind him, saying, "I knew you'd be here." This girl's name is Jamina, and she says to our main protagonist, whose name is Blade, "You know, you've really been standing here since late at night." But Blade says, "Stop making me angry. This is just one of the few breaks I've taken." Jamina says, "Oh, is that so? That's why people have started spreading weird rumors about you." Blade asks, "What kind of rumors?" Seeing this, Jamina looks around and says to him, "Do you still hear that strange voice whenever you pick up a stick or something like that?" Blade doesn't respond to this, so Jamina says, "Seriously, what kind of useless things did you do in your past life that you're facing this punishment?" She further says, "Who could expect that even on a clear day, someone could be struck by lightning? And the biggest thing is that it was black lightning. So I should probably stay inside my shop most of the time." She says, "The new world that has come is very sensitive to these things and this kind of stuff, and it works in a way as if it's some kind of inquisitor. So, if someone puts any suspicion on you," Blade says, "Why are you telling me things like this?" Jamina says, "Because I'm worried about you. You know very well that most people saw that lightning fall on you, and everyone has already started talking about it behind your back. So you shouldn't just stand around like this anywhere. If the church takes you away from here, then what will happen?" Blade says, "No one is going to drag me away like that just because I'm standing here looking at a sword." Jamina says, "If that's the case, then why don't you buy it?" He says, "No, it's too expensive." Jamina says, "But how expensive can it be? It's just a blacksmith from a back alley, so how expensive could it be? If that's the case, I could buy it for you." Hearing this, Blade thinks for a moment, then tells her, 5 gold coins. Hearing this, she is shocked and says, "What? This is some kind of nonsense. 5 gold coins? What kind of useless junk metal is this? With that much money, I could buy so many things." Blade says, "Yeah, I know. If you had that much money, you wouldn't need to work for a whole year." But hearing this, the blacksmith, filled with anger, shouts, "Who called it useless metal?" He yells at them angrily, "Get out of here quickly. This isn't something for back alley kids, so get lost." But Jamina says to him, "Who else would be here? Only slum people would come to see and buy it. Can't you see that? Has your brain completely gone mad, old man?" This makes the blacksmith even angrier, and he says, "You little kids, you don't have an ounce of manners." But she says, "Why are you getting so upset? Just for making a sword that only knights can use? Is your time running out or something?" The blacksmith, shouting in anger, says, "Yes, that's exactly why. Because my time on this earth is completely over. So, why don't you go back to your shop and wash dishes?" Seeing this, Jamina gets angry and says to him, "What did you just say to me? I'm a growing lady." But Blade starts pulling her away and says to her, "You shouldn't pay too much attention to his words." And he says to the blacksmith, "We're leaving." But Jamina angrily says, "Let me go. I haven't done anything wrong here." The blacksmith, with great anger, says to her, "Stop talking nonsense and get out of here." Seeing Jamina leave, he says, "There's really a lot of poison inside her. I gave her too much leeway before. I didn't think she'd do something like this." But then his attention goes downward, where Blade was standing, and he notices very deep marks. Seeing them, he says, "It seems like he was standing here for a long time, which is why there's a deep pit in the dust here." But because of this, he says with some disappointment, he should stop standing here and looking at this sword like this. This will only make things harder for him if he develops such dreams in a place like this. Because I know very well that a slum kid can never get out of the slum. So, I'll only sell this sword to someone who manages to get out of here. I can't leave my last work to be ruined like this. Not like those kids who shine with such bright light even in a place like this. After this, we're told about the place, which is the center of the northern economy. Besides this, there's a lighthouse in the northern region, thanks to the Verson family, which brings power to this place. And we're told about this place called Sarer, a slum where things thrown away have grown into something massive. After this, we're shown a scene in a bar where everyone is drinking and engrossed in flirting with girls. Then, from above, a man comes shouting, dragging a girl, and says to her, cursing, "How dare you try to scam me here?" But the woman, shouting, says, "How did I try to scam you?" The man says, "I've been working as a merchant for 20 years, so how dare you try to sell me fake medicine?" But then Blade steps in front of him and says to him, "There can never be any peace here." Seeing this, the man says to Blade, "Hey, candlemaker, your timing is really great. Quickly bring the madam here." But Blade says to him, "If you want to meet our madam, you'll have to give gold coins, not silver ones." The man, shouting in anger, says, "You should sleep if you do business like this. If there's no madam here, then quickly bring your mother here." Hearing this, Blade starts getting angry and the man further says, "Those candles that tell the time are completely fraudulent, right? How can they burn out so quickly right after lighting them when I haven't even done anything?" Seeing this, Blade says to him, "What kind of fun are you trying to enjoy in 5 minutes? Look, if you don't have money, go to your wife, got it?" Hearing this, the man gets angry and shouts, "What did you say?" Blade says, "You really shout too loudly. If that's the case, let's check. Can you see that clock over there? Let's light the candle and see if it burns for 5 minutes or not. If it doesn't burn for 5 minutes, you can do whatever you want with this woman. But if it burns for 5 minutes, I'm going to beat you badly." Because of this, the man gets very scared and says, "What is it in this boy's eyes that's making me so afraid?" Blade now lights a match and sets the candle burning, saying, "Let's see who is trying to scam here." The man was very nervous, and Blade stood in front of him with the burning candle. The woman was also watching to see how long it would burn, and everyone else was focused on what was happening. But as Blade looks down, he sees the candle has burned to ashes. The man looks back at the clock to check the time, but he can't remember what the time was before, which makes him worry, thinking, what was the time before and what is it now? But then Blade hits the man's nose hard with his wooden sword, causing his nose to bleed, and he falls to the ground. Blade, cursing him, says, 5 minutes are up. After that, Blade kicks him and drags him into a room, where he falls as soon as they enter, and Blade closes the door. Seeing this, the man gets very worried, and Blade says to him, "Now your death has arrived here." Seeing this, the man starts panicking and says, "Wait. But Blade starts hitting him with his wooden sword and says, "You're the one who was trying to scam us here." And he starts beating him badly, saying, "How can a fat guy like you be a merchant? What did you say? Bring my mother? From now on, you need to be much more careful with people who don't have a mother." And with that, he beats the man badly. Now we're shown a scene from the next morning, where Blade says to Georgie, "I think someone is tampering with our candles. It didn't burn for 5 minutes. Are you even listening to what I'm trying to say here, Georgie? Surely someone is tampering with our candles." Then, from a distance, a woman comes shouting, "Who dared to do such a thing? Who is tampering with our precious candles?" Hearing this, he says, "We need to find out about this." So she says to him, "Absolutely, you need to find out about it." But Blade says, "But how am I supposed to find out who did this?" She says, "Actually, I already found out about it." Hearing this, Blade, shocked, says to her, "Who is it?" She says, "It's me. Actually, I was playing a little prank here." And we're told that this is the same madam, and her name is Marilla. She says, "Actually, I was trying to scam those guys a little to make more money." Seeing her face, Blade is completely stunned and can't say anything to her. After that, as he leaves, he says, "That means I beat that guy up for no reason. But anyway, what else could I do besides this? I'm just a small employee." But as he comes down, a man says to him, "I'm really proud of you. I heard what you did yesterday. You did great. Will you tell me what happened while I was gone? You sold the candles really well yesterday, didn't you? I need some money, but right now, None of us have even a little money. But Blade angrily says to him, "What kind of trick are you trying to play with me?" Seeing this, those people get a little worried and say, "Stop scaring us like this. I didn't come here just to ask you for money. I want to do a fair trade with you." Blade says to him, "What trade?" The man says, "If you give me some money, I'll give you something in return." After that, he takes him to a place where, in reality, they had badly beaten a boy. Lifting his hair, he says to him, "Do you recognize his face? Why don't you give me 40 silver coins in exchange for him? I don't think it's a bad deal." But Blade angrily says to him, "What about his finger and necklace?" Seeing this, he says, "We didn't cut it. If we had, we wouldn't have called you here. We just taught him a light lesson. He's completely fresh." But now Blade has no choice because he has to save his friend here, so he gives them the coins. Seeing this, they say, "I knew we could depend on you." But Blade further says to them, "Next time you find him somewhere, don't come to me. Just kill him yourself." Hearing this, the boy gets very worried. But those people, taking the money and leaving, say, "We can't do that. We're thugs, not murderers." But he says, "You're trying to scam your own family's coworker here." But they don't pay any attention to this and say, "I told you we can rely on Blade. He'll definitely give us the money." Blade gets angry at the boy, whose name is Ned, but Blade can't do anything now, so he asks him, "Is any of your bones broken?" He says no. Hearing this, Blade says to him, "If that's the case, then fine. Now get out of here quickly before I break something." Hearing this, he thanks him and leaves. But Blade feels bad because of this, as he was trying to save 5 gold coins, which is his goal to buy that sword. But it seems like he has no money left. After this, Blade tells whale hunter Harvin about all this. Hearing this, Harvin says, "That boy is very lucky that none of his fingers were cut off. My finger and my leg were cut off. That's how I became a public lesson on what happens to pickpockets." He also says to Blade, "Actually, I found out about what's happening with the candles too." Blade says to him, "So you already knew about it?" He says there have been many rumors about it, but it doesn't seem like anyone really trusts them. But Madam, who makes the candles, Marilla, isn't the type of person who would do something like that. Blade says, "That's what I'm saying to you." It seems like Georgie also knows about all this already, but they're not the kind of people who would do something like that. But Harvin says to him, "But if they're really doing something like that, it means they have a very good reason." Blade asks, "What kind of reason?" Harvin tells him, "There's a 90% chance that they urgently need a lot of money. So, Blade, you need to be very careful because there's only one reason an organization would need so much money so quickly, and that's when they're trying to make money fast. It means a fight with another organization is about to start. And in Sarah's slum, there are only 5 bases that dominate here: Horse's Night, Georgie's Swine Butcher, the Black Bear Gambler's Dice, Whale Hunter Captain Vire, and finally, the Moneybug One-Armed Jack. And this is the deep darkness of life that is slowly creeping toward you, hidden in the shadows without any sound." And just like that, one day, One-Armed Jack arrives with many people. He says to Blade, "Where's your boss?" And it's further explained that accidents come without any warning and no notice is given when a disaster happens. Seeing Moneybug with his people, Blade thinks to himself, the fight that was being thought about might actually be completely true. But one of Moneybug's men shouts at Blade, "Hey, little kid, didn't you hear the boss? He's asking where your boss is." But Blade doesn't pay attention to his words and says, "I'm just a candle seller. I don't know anything about this." Seeing this, the man gets very angry and starts cursing Blade. After that, with great anger, he breaks all of Blade's candles and says to him, "You bastard, if you don't know where he is, go find him and bring him here quickly." Because of this, all of Blade's candles are completely broken and ruined in front of him and fall to the ground. There was complete silence in the place, and everyone was quietly watching what would happen next. So Blade, without paying much attention to him, focuses on his candles and starts picking up all the broken candles from under his feet. He says these were such expensive candles. It feels like no candles will be sold today. But the boy, Angrily says to Blade, "Little kid, don't you understand what kind of situation this is?" He only curses at him, but Blade doesn't understand what he said. So he says to him, "I said, move your feet from here." Seeing this, the man gets angry because Blade starts cursing at him again. Because of this, his face turns red with anger, and he's thinking about kicking Blade hard. But Blade calmly sees him coming and, holding his wooden sword, as the man's foot gets very close to Blade, he hits the man's other leg with his wooden sword, causing him to lose balance and start falling. But before he falls, Blade swings his wooden sword and lands a very hard strike on his face, causing the poor guy to pass out. Everyone standing there is shocked to see this, and their mouths are left open. But Moneybug finds this very interesting and quietly watches as Blade easily defeats the man with his wooden sword. But because of Blade doing this, all of Moneybug's companions get angry because he was trying to confront them. But Moneybug stops them all and says, "I really like this kid." He further says to Blade, "You'll understand because I only have one arm, so I hope there isn't too much noise here." Hearing this, Blade says to him, "I don't raise my hand on those who apologize anyway." Hearing this, Moneybug gets very happy and starts laughing, after which he says to Blade, "Why don't we have a private meeting later, and I'll see which bump I take back from here. It seems like you don't know about this, but they die very easily." But then Georgie arrives, shouting, "Moneybug, it seems like something happened here. If you'd told me in advance, I would have cooked up something for you to eat too." Moneybug, laughing, says to him, "Come on, we're not that close to each other." Georgie says, "So, our guests have arrived. Why don't we go upstairs and talk?" He says, "Forget the food, but do you have something good to drink?" Georgie says, "When it comes to hospitality, Marilla never disappoints anyone." Hearing this, he says, "If that's the case, let's go upstairs and test it." As they leave, Blade, calming down and trembling, says, "I was almost about to die here." After that, he only looks at his candles and says, "I don't know how many got broken." But then a voice comes from behind, and Moneybug says to him, "Hey, Rising Star, it seems like your boss is really good at judging complaints. And when you get tired of this burning smell, you can come work with me." But Blade, refusing, says, "I don't have any intention of working anywhere else because they give me food, they give me money, and they also give me a place to sleep." Moneybug, laughing, says to him, "We can do that for you too." And he tosses a coin toward him and says, "This is for those candles." As Blade catches it, he realizes it's a gold coin. He says this is too much for those candles. So he says, "If you work for me, you can get much more than this." After that, he leaves with all his people. But Blade, watching him, says he seems very happy. Did everything go really well here? But then Jamina calls out to Blade and says, "Georgie is calling you upstairs." Now we're shown Georgie and Blade sitting, and everyone is looking at them. Georgie gives Blade a dagger and says, "I thought I'd give this to you later, but it seems like with the kind of situation we have, I had to give it to you much sooner. So keep this in your mind at all times." But the way he was talking, Blade, looking at the environment of the room, understands and says, "The way the mood of this room is going, it feels like the conversation between Georgie and One-Armed Jack was really destructive." Georgie further says to Blade, "And yes, from now on, stop selling candles." Hearing this, he says, "If that's the case, then what should I do? Should I start collecting money or start patrolling the nearby area?" But Georgie says to him, "We know that One-Armed Jack is bringing people from outside. Actually, they're mercenaries who used to be knights." Hearing this, Blade says to him, "Exactly like you." So he says to him, "Yes, you could say that. Exactly like me." Blade further says, "One-Armed Jack has overwhelming numbers of people. But even with all of them, a formal knight like Georgie would find it very difficult to deal with them, because a herd of sheep can never collide with a bull. But if they bring those certain men from outside whose level is equal to a knight, it could greatly upset the balance. Georgie further says, "It's true that we're at a great disadvantage here," and says to him, "I'm going to give you your first mission here." After this, we're told about Harvin, who is a disabled man whose fingers are missing from his hand, and he can't even walk properly. But still, because of his calm mind, he taught himself a language and learned mathematics. And now, using that, he works for Captain Vire. And seeing Harvin, I've understood very well that if you work hard to learn something, it will definitely bring sweet fruit for you. And saying this, Blade is practicing with his sword. But then he hears a voice, which surprises him. The voice says to him, "Your angle is really bad. So, when you swing, you should bend your elbow a little more." Hearing this, Blade goes completely silent and says, "Damn it. This voice has started again as soon as I started swinging the sword." After this, he talks about the incident that happened a month ago when that black lightning struck him. Since then, a strange voice has started to be heard, and this demonic whisper happens whenever he picks up a sword or something like that. So, Blade says, I should take a holy bath before picking up a sword. But then he thinks about ignoring it because the more he tries to reply to it, the more it keeps echoing in his ears. So, he says he should only focus on his training and, focusing intensely, says, I have to perform the best. He sets his mind on one place and applies strength, striking down with great speed. But as the strike hits the ground, Blade also realizes this and says, "This is very different from before. Before, I only used to swing my sword, but it feels like this is some kind of sword path." He also says, worriedly, "What is this thing that's forming in my mind because of this?" After this, we're shown a scene of a dark night in the mountains where snow is falling. A man, wiping blood from his sword, says, "You can never fool experience. The cold winds are so chilly that I can feel them in my bones." But then he senses a man standing behind the trees, so he says to him, "Either you're a complete fool to come here alone, or you have some foolish purpose." But no one comes out from there, and after moving forward a little, he says, "I don't know who you are, but you can come out. I'm already here." But even after a while, there's still no sound from there. But then a voice comes, "Are you Stuna?" He says, "Yes, I'm Stuna." "So, you're the one they call Blade. I heard a guide was coming. Your brown hair and blue eyes, people see you and think you might be a noble." Blade, handing Stuna a letter, says, "This letter was sent for you by my boss." Stuna, reading the letter, says, "What? He's called many mercenaries who are like knights to oppose another organization? So, that's why he needs my help." Blade says to him, "Let's go. I'll start guiding you. If we start now, we'll reach there in 2 days." Stuna was looking at Blade, after which he says to him, "I don't think I'm going to follow someone like a fool." Blade says to him, "I'm capable enough to guide you." So, he says to him, "But I don't think so. It can't be that you're so smart, otherwise you wouldn't do such a foolish thing." Hearing this, Blade feels a little scared, and he says to Stuna, "Even if that's the case, it doesn't raise any question that I could kill you on the way." Hearing this, Stunes gets very angry, and Blade was watching him, after which he says to him, "So, keep this in mind that you follow me properly. Besides, I don't want to ruin my first mission like this." Stuna, making a bad face, thinks, "What is this? I deliberately showed myself as if I was very scared, but he completely ignored me." And he realizes, this is exactly why Georgie likes him so much. This boy is really worth it. Now they start walking, and after walking for a while, they reach a cave where they sit by a fire. Blade is staring at Stuna. As his attention goes to this, he asks Blade, "Why are you looking at me like that? Is this the first time you've seen a retired knight?" He says, "Yes, this close, it's the first time." Hearing this, Stuna says, "So you're a frog in a well." Seeing this, he asks him, "Where did you come from?" Stuna tells him, "I came from Dakia." Hearing this, he takes a long breath and says, "That's an even worse place than a well." Seeing this, Stuna gets angry and says to him, "It would be better for you not to forget your path. If you keep doing this, I'll cut you in half." But he says to him, "You don't need to say such scary things. I've heard that knights tell these kinds of jokes to scare people. But he had taken out some food from his bag. Seeing this, Stuna happily says, "This is beef. Are you going to share it with me?" But he refuses and says, "No, I only brought it for myself. Don't you have anything to eat?" He says, "Yes, I do," and takes out some dried beef from his bag. Now Blade starts cooking his beef on sticks, and the smell is making Stuna even more restless. So he says to him, "Hey, kid, don't you want to ask something?" Hearing this, he says, "Why are you suddenly saying this to me?" Stuna says, "I'm ready to answer any of your questions, but for that, you'll have to give me a piece of beef. This isn't an opportunity that comes often." But Blade, looking at him, says to him, "If you want it, just ask me directly." Seeing this, Stuna says to him, "Kid, I have my pride. A knight can only take something if he can give something in return." But Blade says, "But you're retired." Stuna says, "Even so, I still believe in this, that I'm a knight." So he asks him, "What's your name?" He says, "Stuna." He asks, "How old are you?" He says, 42. Besides this, Blade asks him, "Can you use aura here?" Hearing this, he says to him, "Look at you. You only look innocent from the outside. Most knights can't use aura, and using aura in a real fight is a completely different thing." But Blade says to him, "Can you use it or not? Just tell me straight." Seeing this, he says to him, "Well," and starts explaining to him. Blade's eyes widen, and he says to Stuna, "You can take all of it if you want." But Stuna, picking up his sword, says, "A knight can only take something if he can give something back. But there was a time when I could do whatever I wanted. And I ate junk beef just a few days ago, so I can do this." Seeing this, Blade, surprised, thinks, "I'm really going to see it today." Stuna takes out his sword and holds it in front of his forehead, closing his eyes. Blade asks him, "Why did you close your eyes?" He explains, "I have to draw it out from the depths of my soul in this world. So, kid, watch this carefully. This is a knight's essence." And as he starts releasing his aura on his sword, a very large light emerges, and along with the light, aura starts coming out. His sword is completely covered in aura, which looks very impressive. Blade is also very excited seeing this. After this, we're shown that they've returned here. Stuna says to him, "I feel really bad here, like I'm some kind of pig. It would be a little better if it was a bit drier. So, would it be good if I looked like a pig without being a knight?" He says, "I'm not talking about how I look here. Actually, I'm talking about my mood. You know, I have a knight's pride. Why do I need to go through this hole?" Blade explains, "Because I was told to bring you here. But this is a big secret, so we can't go through the main gate directly. Let's go from here. After leaving here, I'll prepare a bath for you." But as they enter, Stuna says to him, "It's very quiet here, which is bothering me." He says, "That's exactly why, because it's nighttime." But as they move forward, he says, "Is this place really this quiet?" He says, "Not at all. It feels like a big fight happened here." And we're shown that there are bodies lying in front of them in really bad condition. Seeing this, Blade says to him, "Let's split up. I'll tell you where the back door is, which only our organization's members know." Stuna says to him, "But what about you?" He says, "It's better for me to go through the main gate. It's better if we split up now to divert attention. I'll meet you later." And saying this, he leaves Stuna there and goes away. He quickly enters the same bar and sees that a lot of destruction has happened there too. Georgie, seeing Blade, says, "You're safe here. You did a great job. Moneybug attacked us first, as I should have expected from them. The people who took the money are on a different level." Blade asks him, "Are you okay?" Georgie tells him, "I was fighting here for a long time, but I fought a person who is on a knight's level, which is why I'm in this condition. But in the end, I defeated him. But the biggest thing is that you brought him here." So he says, "Yes, but there were his people at the main gate, so I told him where the back door is. He'll be here in a little while." Georgie says to him, "That's great. So we can attack Moneybug tomorrow, and we'll completely finish this thing tomorrow." He also asks about Stuna. "How is he? Is he completely fine?" He says, Yes, he seemed like a really good person. Stuna's health is very good. So, Georgie says to him, has he lost weight? Well, if you want to live a long life, you have to take care of yourself. But as Blade says to him, yes, besides that, he can also use aura like a knight. I'm completely sure that tomorrow we'll beat them badly. Hearing this, Georgie is very shocked and says to him, what? And then Stuna arrives here. So Blade says, it seems like he's here. As he comes inside, Georgie says to him, Blade, did he really use aura here? He says, yes, I saw it myself. Hearing this, Georgie, panicking, says to him, quickly, come behind me, because Stuna is a person who can never use aura. Seeing this, Blade, very shocked, says, what do you mean? But then the man who came pretending to be Stuna says, you've really come very far here. It's been a long time since we met, hasn't it, Georgie? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the recap, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more epic stories. See you in the next one.